been making YouTube videos, there have been a lot of times that I've been in the house and I've been asked, not a lot, but every once in a while, about this woodwork. And this woodwork is all handmade. I don't think you can buy much of it in this form. This up top, right up here, is called an Architrave molding. And I discovered it while I was looking for a different type of woodwork to make for the house when we remodeled it. Now, I had really never done anything like this before, so I had to figure it out myself. And there's not a whole lot of mystery to it. It looks mysterious, but besides being tedious, it's really not that difficult to make. And I'd like to show you how it's done and maybe make a little one to show you how you can do it too. So in this video, we'll show you how this whole window is trimmed out, and we'll concentrate on this molding at the top because the rest of it's a lot easier. I'm going to go into a bit of detail. I have this multifaceted problem in that I'm a retired person who was a teacher for most of my adult life. There was one comment I got in a video quite a ways back that was supposed to be snarky, but I actually took it as a compliment. After a guy watched it, he said, "Boy, you ask this guy what time it is and he'll show you how to make a clock." Well, I'll do that, but I'll try not to do it too much.
Oh my God. Whatever you do, don't ask him a question.
The first part of this is the bottom strip, which is just a 1/4 inch piece. Above that is a scallop or cove molding that sits on top of it. Then there's a 3/4 inch board with an ogee. Finally, another ogee sitting on top of that. I've got this 3/4 inch oak board. I planed it that way, but you usually buy them 3/4 of an inch anyway. It's not too long. I'm not making a window molding here. I'm just making an example. I don't know if I'm going to have enough of this board. I might have to have a little bit more. Usually you need about 6 inches or so, but we'll make a go of it. We're going to start off first by cutting off the 1/8 inch strip that goes at the bottom of the Architrave molding. What we're going to do is make that second piece, the one that has the cove in it. Now, there are lots of ways you can do this. The way that I did it was using this router bit. This is the router bit that you use for the raised panel on a cabinet door. Usually comes as part of a set. It's pretty expensive, but you can get one that is not of this quality. This is a Freud bit. There are some Chinese ones on Amazon that usually yellow in color. Yoniko is one that I found that actually is pretty good quality, but they're usually half the price. And what this will do is it will cut a scallop in the wood right here. This has to be used in a router table. You cannot use this freely with a freehand router. You'll kill yourself. The wood will go flying, you'll go flying, the router will go flying. Don't try it that way. There are other ways to make this though. It can be made on a table saw blade by running the wood at an angle with a special jig clamp to the table saw. But this is the way I'm going to show how I do it. Now, this is the kind of router bit that you've got to take small bites with and work your way into it. Because if you try to throw the wood into that wide bit all at once, it'll just throw it across the room. And the reason I'm routing it first and then cutting it afterwards is because a large piece of wood is much easier to work with in a routing table than trying to cut it first and run the strip through, particularly with a bit like this. Okay, this is the final and fifth pass. Okay, this is what it looks like when it's done. And in case you didn't know or don't have a router table or have yet, that has to be on the lowest setting for the router. My router goes from 1 to 6 in speed settings. This is 1. A large router bit develops a lot of centrifugal force. So 1 and then putting it through slowly is the way to do it. And you get less burning that way too. There's no burning on this at all. Okay, the scallop part has been cut on the saw, and it's cut just above the scallop area. Let me see if I can give you an end grain view here. How's that focusing? Notice that there's a little flat part left right here on top of the scallop, about 1/4 inch. But now we have a nice scallop molding. So let's put our two pieces kind of temporarily together. So here's our bottom strip. And here is the scallop that fits on top of it. Now we have our two OG moldings to fit on top of that. Now, I've got to stop here to just mention that this molding needs to be made fairly long. No matter what size window you're using, you need to make it at least 1 foot longer than the width of the window. And here's why. The window has a certain width, and then you're going to have the side moldings on either side of that. Mine are 4 inches. Some are 2.5, 3, whatever size you want. Mine are 4 inches. So there's the window, and the top architrave molding has to be 4 inches out on each side, so that's an extra 8 inches. Then the molding itself on the top sticks out beyond the side moldings by 1 inch or 2 on each side. Then you've got to have enough to cut your return on the end caps on the end. So we're talking 4, 4, 2, 2, and at least 1, 1. So that's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And it's important that you cut everything from the same molding. And I'll show you that later on, but if you make 2 or 3 different moldings, they might not be exactly the same. So when you cut your returns, you've got to make sure it lines up perfectly when you match them. And if you have the molding here and then cut a return from another piece from another molding you've made, it might not be exact and line up. It should be, but if you don't have like a precision router lift, it could be slightly off. So if this window looks good and that window over there looks good because they were cut from the same piece that you made, you won't be able to tell the difference even if it's a little off. But if your end cap is off, it'll really show. Now, this next router bit is called an OG, and you can see the profile on the blade right there. And it really does a good job. This router bit has been through hell and back. I've cut hundreds and hundreds of feet of wood with this. Now that OG bit is another bit that I have a lot of respect to. It's not as big as the first one, but it's big and chunky enough. I always do at least 2 passes, which is what I did with this, and I'm very carefully using it. So here's the profile that it made. I've got to cut this off so that it sits with a flat part right on here. So the width we'll be cutting it is so that it will look, it'll be like this. So I've got to set the saw to cut this plus the width of this scalloped or cove molding. It's been cut, and let me set this up so that it's facing you so you'll be able to see it easier. Here's my 1/4 inch strip. Here's my scallop, which will sit on top of that. And here is the OG molding that's been cut wider here. And when I put this on, it's going to sit right on top of that one. Now, I need to make another one just like this OG molding, but the width of this plus the OG. And what I have left just isn't going to be enough. So I've got to get myself another 3/4 inch piece of wood. Well, we've got our top piece made now. The same OG, but this time wider. And I'm not gonna have to cut it down to width because this piece of wood just happened to be exactly the right width. So let's assemble it. Okay, if you remember, we had the 1/4 inch piece. We have the cove piece. We've got the first OG that is a little bit narrower and fits right on top of the cove. And we've got another one just like this one, but is wider here, so it fits on top of this one. And there we have the Architrave molding. Now we just got to glue it together. Now, when you're doing this, you need to clamp it good. I will admit, with most of them that I made in the house, I used a 23 gauge nailer which shoots nails that are like needles to help hold things together, and then I still clamped it. But it helped me set some, particularly the ones that were really long. I actually have a 14-footer in there on a 12-foot sliding door. And you do need a lot of clamps. Now I've got these little clamps, I've got 28 of them, and I've got another 25 of various other clamps, like these parallel clamps or other F clamps. So, you know, for small ones, you just need 3 or 4 or 5 clamps. If you want to do a bunch at once, or a very long one, you need more clamps. So, I am going to let this set a while, and then we'll come out and we'll do some forming on it so we can actually turn it into something that can go on top of a window. important is making the end caps first, because you can't cut them after you've cut the molding to fit. So it's done a very specific way, and it can be a little complicated, but I'll show you how to make it so that there's a process so it'll do it right. So what we've got to do is cut a 45 in here first. Then we've got to make a straight cut. And we've got to save this piece. Now, we've got to do the same thing on the other end. And save this. Now we're down to actually cutting the 45s in the molding to put above the window. Together in a very specific way, and if you do it the way I just said and then watch here, you'll hit it every time. So here's the top molding, and look how much shorter it is. It was sticking out this far before. Just cutting, making those cuts to get the miter joints and the caps on there took a lot of wood. Okay, notice also that by cutting the 45s, not only did it make a 45 here, but look at how it automatically curved this out to make these kind of horns on the side, which really looks good. Now, here are the two pieces that we cut off. What you have to do now is you have to switch them, one side to the other. And when you do that, they will fit into this 45 area. And here it is. Fit in there like that. And it really looks good. Particularly if you cut it off the same piece, it'll line up quite well. Now this just needs to be glued and or tacked in, and we're good to go. I'll tell you the best way, the easiest way to assemble these is to cut your molding and put it up over the window, and then put your end caps on the end with either a clamp or, better yet, a pin nailer. And then you can move on to the next window after that. So. Is interested in the fluted moldings that I have along the sides of the windows and doors, and they are called flutes because they're a small dimple and I have 5 dimples in each board. The reason they're called that is long ago when they used to make flutes, not the Native American flute like I have, but real orchestral flutes. They were originally made out of wood, and what they had to do was take wood and then hollow out a round area in it and put the 2 pieces of wood back together and then carve it into a flute and have the finger holes and such. So those became known as flutes, those little dimples. They're not hard to make, but they are so tedious. I have so many of these things all over the house. I have hundreds and hundreds of feet of flutes. Now, this process can be used for anything. Doorways, larger windows, patio doors. The only difference is the lengths of the pieces of wood, but other than that, they're all the same. And there is a way to make them that's easier. This is the router bit that makes flutes. It's like a bullet nose. And goes in the router, and you can take and use your edge guide that usually comes with every router and put it along the board, and then go along and make the flute, and then move it over and make another flute, and so forth. And this works great if you've just got a flute or 2 to make. But what if you've got 5 flutes in each board, and you've got 20 or 30 8-foot boards like that, along with a few other things. I have one board that's this wide in the kitchen with like a line of flutes on them. This can be very tedious. So what you do is you do this. This is an example of a flute maker. This is made by Rockler, and this is a plunge base for this router. The barrel of the router comes out, it goes in this. This is made in such a way that it has 2 rails, and you put your board in between these 2 rails, and it rides on the rails, so it can't twist, it can't move to one side or the other. It rides the board like a train on a railway. Then you can use this to adjust the router to make one flute. You go down the board using the rails, then you move it over and you tighten these down, and you go down again, and you make flutes all along the board. There's a guide right here, a measurement guide, so that you can get the flutes nice and even, and it's markable with a pencil, so you can actually make marks to be able to hit it exactly in the same place each time. This is a very nice rig, and if you have to make a lot of flutes, it's almost a necessity. Now, when you're using this thing, if you should ever decide to make flutes, a real word of advice. First of all, the flutes don't have to be that big. You just have to go down on the curved part of the bullet. If you try to make them too deep, you're gonna have to make multiple passes. And if you have 5 flutes per board to make, and you have to make 3 passes on each flute, it is gonna get tiresome very fast. So all you need to do is go down 1, maybe 2 swipes, because just having the dimple is enough. You don't have to make it deep. Also, notice how this bit looks a little bit burned? That's because when I started using it, I was using it at too high a speed. And what it does, it burns the wood. So you have these little scorch marks in it that are a devil to get out. It makes so much work. You have to wrap sandpaper like on a wood dowel and sand them, and they don't come out easy. A way to alleviate that is to lower the speed of this very low. Yes, you have to go slower, but a slow router bit doesn't burn. It's a fast router bit that burns. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but that's true. Now, I'm not going to make any flutes. I'm just telling you how to do it because it's not that much fun to set up, and I don't really need any, and I've made so many, I really don't want to see another flute again as long as I live. So let's briefly talk about the rest of the way that this window is made. First of all, you start off by making the windowsill. And the windowsill is nothing more than a fat T. Board, it will stick out at least this far. You determine how far you need your extensions on the side, and then cut these out, and the board goes down there. Now these boards go over it, so you don't have to be close there. You just gotta watch out for this right here. Make sure that's nice and tight, and that's it. So, you put your windowsill on. The next piece of wood you put on is the top part. And again, that's being covered by these boards, so you don't have to be precise with how tight it fits on the ends. Just get it close. Now, the reason these are so wide is because I have cement block walls and 3.5 inch 2x4s along with the wall board and everything. So it's a very thick wall. Next thing you do is put the boards on the side. You need to cut those fairly tight so they're snug at the bottom and top. And then from there, you can put the fluted molding on the sides. And I just move it in about 1/4 inch in from the edge to make it look better on both sides. Then after that, you put the Architrave along the top, which is just like the one we made outside. And it's best to cut your end caps like we did and then mount the whole thing along the top, and that'll give you the right length. And notice that the length just kind of sticks out a little bit over the fluted molding. And then the last thing you do is put the end caps on, one side and then the other. Now, remember the part we made the cove molding right there with a little strip underneath it? Take a look down here. Look familiar? It's the same piece without the two OGs on it. And this is a little wider here. That's all. So we have the strip at the bottom, we have the cove molding, and that makes a really nice looking scalloped bottom finish for the window. Well, there you have it. Only of interest to those people who are wanting to do this. Those people are usually looking at my camper or camping videos or making fishing baits or mired of other things. Probably wouldn't be too interested in this, but there you got what was for me actually the short-winded version of it, even though it may not have seemed so.
Whatever you do, don't ask him a question.
If you like the video, hit the like button below. It moves it to the top, so anybody looking about how to dress out a window or making moldings, they'll find it easier. And subscribe if you have a mind to. And thank you for watching. You've made it a long way if you get to this point.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.